Hello and welcome. This is a video on kind of a rough summary of Paul Virilio's work and some of the main themes that he has discussed. And I thought I would do this because there's a lot of Paul Virilio's work which are, deals with separate subjects which seem really distinct and perhaps even irrelevant to each other. And it takes a while to actually understand the connections between all of these different topics. So I've gotten some, feedback on stuff that I've written or videos I've made about Paul Virilio, like who is he and where should people start with reading him. And he's sometimes difficult to read, especially his early stuff. He's got that very kind of like bombastic postmodern style to it. I don't think he is a postmodernist. People who's more familiar with him will know that he doesn't come from the kind of critical theory, at least the Marxist, but like the typically Marxist and leftist orientated species of critical theory. He was a Catholic, and he didn't really fit into any clear-cut political categories, which is why he's interesting. And he really is a kind of, I suppose you could say, he's a kind of phenomenologist of technology, but not just any technology, like within specific coordinates and specific context and themes. So I thought I would go through some of these and just kind of give a very general view of them and make some connections between them. Things which seem perhaps very distinct or irrelevant to each other are actually very connected once you understand the bigger picture of what he's doing. At least what I think he's trying to do. There's not a whole lot of academic work on him, at least that I've come across. So it's I'm really interpreting this organically. I'm not just repeating other interpretations of him. I'm really just kind of thinking about what he's doing. Yeah, and just another thing I should say before we start is, so the main texts that I've read, which I'm getting this from, are Information Bomb, The Administration of Fear, Speed and Politics, which I've just finished reading, and The Original Accident. There's also The Aesthetics of Disappearance and Pure War, which I haven't read yet. So I haven't read those two, but I've read four of his main texts, and I think that from those four main texts you can grasp an overall conception of what he's doing and make sense of the different moving parts, we could say. So the main themes which I think he deals with are speed. He deals a lot with speed. We'll go into this in more detail. Public emotion, psychopolitics. I like that word. I like to refer to it as psychopolitics. Although he doesn't use that word, but I like that word. I think it applies to what he's doing. Military logistics, which is related to both speed and public emotion. And accidents, catastrophes, hence the name Information Bomb and The Original Accident. So I think we should start with public emotion. I think that might actually be the best place to start. The most relevant texts for public emotion that I've read, at least I've come across, are The Administration of Fear, which is obviously, it's about fear. So, and notice it's an administration of fear. It's not like primordial pre-civilized fear. It's not like, I'm living in a kind of pre-civilized or pre-technological age, and there's bandits and there's wild animals, and I'm completely exposed to all these kind of natural, we could say, or pre-civilized threats. The administration of fear. This is a sort of propagandistic use of fear that we've developed, and we're going to go through this in more detail. This is particularly relevant to the state of emergency. Obviously, the state of emergency is kind of a, if you think from 9/11 to the recent pandemic to even I think a lot of the environmental politics and the kind of politically correct university politics are very much based around safe spaces. They incorporate the language of security, fear. Everything's fearful. trauma. That that psychiatric term has made a serious comeback in, or not comeback, but has inserted itself into our discourse. There's a lot of sort of administrated fear, or perhaps fear has become something we are politically and maybe even economically and technologically invested in to a certain extent, which means we can't really overcome it or deal with it properly. So this comes from the change in the nature of propaganda. So I think the most useful quote, which he repeats through a lot of his different texts, is that the difference between the 20th century and the 21st century was that there was a transition in the mode of propaganda, and that the 20th century was still stuck in the typically modernist standardization of opinion, and this has moved to the synchronization of emotion. So that it's moved from the standardization of opinion to the synchronization of emotion. And this, of course, is relevant to our mass communication, our infrastructure of mass communication, where, for example, 9/11 was the most watched or most televised real event in history. So our sort of public emotions are no longer limited to a specific locality. They move across this infrastructure instantaneously, and they affect the kind of emotional disposition of all of us as we consume media. And we could also say, we're going to get into this a bit later, but we haven't really developed a good way of dealing with this synchronized emotion. So there's obviously kind of themes here of a kind of a post-human age, or a post-individual, or a post-rational age as well, because when we're standardizing our opinions, we're very much trying to, at least even if we're being ideological, we're at least trying to ground our opinions in some sort of consistent or somewhat rational and thoughtful outlook or perspective of the world. Where with the synchronization of emotion, you'll notice that you don't need consistency, logical consistency. You don't need rational regulation. It's purely indefinitely plastic and maneuvered around. For example, my body, my choice, which is kind of a slogan which applied to abortion during the lockdowns, was not applied to the public by the same sorts of people ideologically to the public health response. That's because we don't have a standardized set of opinions anymore. We have public emotions, and they just move around indefinitely in whatever way that's useful. So the most relevant texts for this would be Administration of Fear and Information Bomb. So the next topic I want to get into is speed and military logistics. And I haven't read Pure War, but that's about this. And Speed and Politics is it's a difficult read. It's very postmodern and bombastic in its style, but it's an extremely good text. So Virilio basically, he really thinks that military logistics is such a determining force in the development of history and progress and so on. And the overall goal, he thinks, of military logistics is to cause destruction from a distance. That what we've done with our technological military logistics is we've caused destruction from, nukes, drones, projectiles, guns, and so on, to surpass the obstacle of space in order to cause harm, in order to cause destruction. So hold on, he has a quote, which is so some of this is really bound up in kind of jargon and technological jargon, so just bear with me, I'll explain what it means. But he says, from this point on, the binomial fire movement exists only to designate a double movement of implosion and explosion. The power of implosion receives the old subsonic vehicles, means of transportation, projectiles, and so on, that power to penetrate, and the power of explosion receives the destructive power of classical molecular explosives. In this paradoxical object, simultaneously explosive and implosive, bear with me, the new war machine combines a double disappearance, the disappearance of matter in nuclear disintegration, and the disappearance of places in vehicular extermination. So I'll repeat that. The disappearance, so basically what he's trying to say is the war machine now enacts or causes the disappearance of matter in nuclear disintegration and the disappearance of places in vehicular extermination. So we're going more into kind of his spatial politics now, and obviously the nuclear destruction causes the destruction of matter. So we have this kind of disappearance of matter, and we also have the disappearance of places through the rapid speed of transportation. And this was written. This book I'm quoting from now was written in the 70s. So you could also now include the rapid movement of information across communication networks. So the sort of the history of developing speed, in particular for the sake of military logistics, the speed of projectiles, the speed of destruction. In order to achieve this, we've basically destroyed distances, meaning places, localities, and we've also destroyed. We also kind of have developed techniques of destroying matter through things like total destruction of matter, explosions, and so on. What's important here is that we lose the need for geostrategic judgment. So he'll argue that the statesman becomes replaced by the state apparatus. I'll read another quote. The transition from the state of siege of wars of space to the state of emergency. So we're talking about the emergence of the state of emergency through military logistics. And he believes basically that if you look at like a city, if you look at the infrastructure of if you take like a medieval fortress and you look at the infrastructure of moats, of ramparts, maybe to stop cavalry. If you look at the moats, so you can pull a bridge up and people can't get across. There's a regulation of movement which is always going on with cities and with fortresses. And you're trying to regulate the movement of a kind of mass of bodies, especially in a military context, but you could also expand that into just public policy of managing a city as well, in just terms of managing the movement and location of people for the sake of transportation, the economy, managing public safety or whatever. So the way we logistically manage movement is crucial for Virilio, and he thinks that this is really the one of the, if not the kind of causing factors of the eventual emergence of the state of emergency, because this old regulation of movement sort of gets replaced by military virtues and geostrategic judgment gets replaced by, we can say, sort of like almost autonomous systems of speed management. Yeah, okay, that sounds really, I know that sounds really weird and crazy, but just bear with me. You can sort of think of it in the same way as Marx arguing that surplus value, profit, capital driving, making more, trying to grow, sort of surpasses the rational regulation of human societies, and it takes on its own like autonomous logic and kind of expands and grows and so on without regulation. So he thinks that this process of speed is also taking on the same process, And he says the transition from the state of siege of wars, wars of space, to the state of emergency. So the war of space is the old war between armies, where there's like a fortress and there's people trying to siege the fortress, and there's kind of physical buffering distances, and there's a kind of old school logistical management of movement. This is being replaced by the state of emergency, and the state of emergency is the war of time. This only took several decades to make this transition, during which the political era of the statesman was replaced by the apolitical era of the state apparatus. So notice the transition from a statesman into a state apparatus, from we could say political judgment to kind of systemic, management of something which is kind of beyond our control. Facing the advent of such a regime, we would do well to wonder about what is much more than a temporal phenomenon. So I guess what he's saying there is that what's happening isn't just progress in the stupid typical sense. It's the destruction of space. And you can then think of, okay, I'll just keep going. We're gonna this will start to make sense in a bit, right? If it doesn't already make sense. If it does make sense already, then you're probably just a genius. So the next kind of context I think we need to frame this within is the deterrence era. The deterrence era is obviously the era emerging from the Cold War and the possibility of nuclear war. So what does nuclear war do? Well, it stops us going to war, right? Like total destruction stops us actually going to war. So, and this nuclear war, think of it in terms of speed. You have the ability for the United States to nuke a country across the world. You have the ability for China or Russia to nuke a country across the world very, very quickly. So all of these ramparts, moats, fortresses, these things which traditionally managed movement, regulated movement and speed, are surpassed by projectiles. And this happens both with our communication systems and with our projectile missile systems. So our missile systems are no longer buffered, and buffer is an extremely important theme with the Ukraine-Russia war, because what does Russia want? A buffer zone. But these traditional buffers and ramparts, which were sort of part of the traditional military architecture, are surpassed by just these projectiles that can just fly across the world in very quickly. And he'll go into a lot of the details about how quick they can go and all this stuff, right? So in this sense, we replace armor with public emotion, in the sense that we live under a constant state of emergency in which we have to deter this mutual annihilation. So the thing that stopped wars isn't actually even the physical technology. It's the deterrence of using this technology. It's the state of fear, administration of fear, and so on, of perpetual avoidance of the use of these technologies. So our armor, how we defend ourselves against the intrusion of a certain force, against speed, against movement, actually becomes a state of public emotion. It's not even physical anymore. And there's a continuous theme here in Virilio of us disappearing space, disappearing matter, disappearing Earth, disappearing geostrategic, logistical thinking, in favor of things which are in a sense immaterial or a threat to or beyond space and time. Or maybe not time, but at least beyond spatial boundaries. So there's a crisis going on here in how civilizations defend themselves. We no longer think of defending ourselves in the same way that we once did in, for example, the medieval era when we had, fortresses. Peace only operates on the condition of indefinite fear. Politics becomes replaced by the administration of fear. Most of his books respond to this crisis in some form or another. So, the original accident, this is another text which he has, and obviously the information bomb is very relevant to this. The original accidents is really, we could say, it's probably the most like technologically relevant, at least probably the most specifically about technology, even though they're all about technology. But and in this book, he's sort of discussing how technological inventions emerge relating to all of what we've just discussed. So he says that when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. So the engineers, the inventors of these technologies, can't perceive something, right? So we're getting more into the philosophic dilemma here. They can't perceive the accidents, and accidents are like substances within the invention itself. So when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. There's a hidden substance within the invention, which emerges. So tie this into, for example, what he's talking about with the surpassing of the statesman with the state apparatus, the surpassing of the military logistics, which are based around the regulation of speed, space, and movement, to systems of instantaneous destruction, which destroy matter, destroy space. They're instantaneous, and through projectiles and so on. You could also include information networks in this too. All of this leads to something which he, in the original accident, he called, I think this is a really good word for summarizing what this means, philofolly, which is a mixture between philosophy and folly. And philofolly basically refers to the fact that the inventors of technologies no longer have any sense of the hidden catastrophes which are hidden within the technologies. There's a sense of folly. There's a sense of stupidity. Like progress brings out this utter progress, and technological scientific progress brings out this utter stupidity, this ignorance, which is the opposite to what it's supposed to do, right? We're supposed to be enlightened and so on. So we have the relationship we have to technology through speed, destruction of distance, and of course synchronization through synchronization of emotion through instant communication also puts us in a state of the inability to, perceive what we are doing. And he'll often talk about something like technological vitality or technological vitalism, where we're sort of caught into a somewhat maniacal state of technological use and invention, in which we lose the ability to actually understand what we are doing. So just maybe about the relevance of why I think that he's becoming popular again, and the aims of what he's trying to do here. And I think that what he's trying to do is he's trying to understand what something that Thomas Hobbes called sorry, this word is fucking annoying to say. Perturbations. And perturbations is an old weird word, which means the obscuring of reasoning, the obscuring of right reasoning. Classical thought, Plato, Aristotle, Stoics, will always speak of things like insatiable pleasure, overwhelming fear, which is relevant to the fear administration and so on, of things which obscure the ability to actually think. They obscure the philosophic life. They obscure the ability to perform a political life in a justifiable sense. So he's understanding these perturbations, things which obscure right reasoning. And Hobbes had a whole list of things which he thought obscured right reasoning, which I won't go into here. But I think he's trying to understand perturbations through technological phenomenology. He's trying to understand it through technological phenomenology. Um, and the relevance of him over the past few years in particular, you can see in the increasing obviousness of a total lack of any ability to avert catastrophes through technological use and invention. And obviously biotechnologies, which he talks about a little bit in Information Bomb, is sort of the ultimate disaster of this, where we ontologically threaten ourselves. But it's a kind of he's almost going into an extreme analysis of the need to reevaluate the precautionary principle concerning these technologies, the use of these technologies, the nature of our military logistics, and so on. That he's sort of trying to force us in a way. I think is what he's trying to do through his philosophy. He's trying to force us to reevaluate the need for a precautionary principle, right? So if you think about the accident argument, the shipwreck, there's a substance hidden beneath the invention. We need to start thinking about that substance. We need to start actually thinking about what that substance is and what it might do, and how we might regulate this in some sense. His philosophy is very regulatory. It's very much about regulation, but it's not just simple legal, procedural, bureaucratic regulation. Like it's a kind of phenomenological regulation in a sense. It's going into regulation from a phenomenological perspective. Speed. To bring it back to speed, because it's an interesting concept, and it's difficult to get your head around when you start hearing him talking about speed. Like, we're used to thinking of speed and movement in the sense that physics tells us to think of speed and movement, right? He's basically the only person I've ever come across who's thought about speed and movement from a philosophical and phenomenological perspective, relating to these really big issues, at least these really big issues of civilizational defense, how we defend ourselves, how we understand ourselves in sense of like where we are, our place, our identity, our sense of belonging, mass communication, the obscuring of right reasoning. How do we think clearly? How do we act politically in a justifiable sense and rational sense, and so on and so forth. How speed and movement is not just an issue for natural science, for physics, but it's an issue for philosophy. It's an issue for technological regulation, or critique of technological invention, and the ethical regulation of technological invention, and so on. It's an issue for the philosophical life. It's this speed. If you think about speed, it's like you don't have time to think. If everything's like it's like this speed is like this dizzying vortex of technological absurdity, which is putting us in like a horrifically dangerous and stupid state of being politically and socially, and so on, and economically probably too. So yeah, that's just and again, this is my kind of interpretation. These are just the themes that are sticking out to me. I'm sure there's other areas of Virilio's work which are important too. These are the main areas which are sticking out to me, and these seem to be the main themes of his work. And when you start to piece them together, the kind of absurd, bombastic, postmodern style of his writing starts to become a little more digestible and penetrable, and it starts to kind of add up in a little sense. Not that everything he says is absolutely right, but he's definitely in the right areas. He's definitely what's the word? He's definitely onto the right themes and the right dilemmas and the right problems. Mass communication obviously is a constant issue today. The talk of nuclear warfare, the use of technology, the rapid movement of information, and so on and so on and so on. This has all just become completely relevant in the past 10 years, in particular the past 5 years, and I hope to see him more attention being put onto him. So that's basically it for me. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed before.